No? So let's carry on then with this series of techniques. I'll just mention some of them in this little kind of progressive development of love and compassion and bodhicitta. So the foundation is this one of equanimity, which is the basis. We then begin to grow on that all beings are equal in their wish to be happy and wish to suffer, not to suffer, which is the basis of our ability to develop love, compassion, bodhicitta for all of them. We start right there in equanimity. So we're beginning to develop love and compassion for them because they want it, not because they're nice to me. That's where shifting the basis for developing love and compassion. Huge point, actually. So, in other words, we're getting ourselves out of the equation, you know? Stop being so self-centered. So the next one sounds a very funny one. This next one, it's like the next point in this 11. It says, all sentient beings, have you been your mother? So you need your calculator for this one. It's just to get your head around this vast point that given that your mind is beginningless, given that everybody's minds are beginningless, given there are countless living beings, trillions and trillions, given this, given that they're all beginningless and endless, so it follows logically, given these things, that we've all met each other countless times. It follows, logically, as mad as it sounds. You know, it's not how we think, it's not how we see, it's not what we remember. But taking Buddha's view, there are countless sentient beings, countless mind streams, they're all beginningless and endless, so it follows logically. We bumped into each other countless times. But the point here is to simply to take the point, they've all been your mum. So the reason they use this is because we're trying, a couple of the techniques are related to trying to see, the next point is the kindness of the mother, see how the mother is kind. And the only reason to think this, because they just take the example of a mother as a person who's nurtured you, loved you, taken care of you, and this kind of thing. So clearly in the modern world, especially the materialist Western world, this sounds very peculiar to us, because we often think our mother's the exact opposite. She's the cause of all our problems, you know. So maybe there's an extra little additional thing we need to do there to get to see. But as, you know, as the Dalai Lama says, if you don't like the thought of it, they've all been your mother, think they've all been your father. If you don't like that, just think they've all been somebody who's taken care of you. You're using this idea just so you can begin to think of how beings have taken care of you, how beings have nurtured you, loved you, because they've all been your mother countless times, they've all done that. And therefore the next little point, the fourth one, is I must repay their kindness. It kind of step by step. People do go into these meditations for years, often to the retreat in the mountains, for years going through these, thinking them through logically, until eventually the penny drops, it becomes experiential for them, you know. So, okay, what does it mean even then mother is kind? I think there's various things there. But I think, first of all, the word kind is very interesting. You know, we use that word, I think. If I go to the cafe and I order chocolate cake and she smiles at me and gives me an extra big piece plus extra cream and a discount, I will definitely smile at her and say, oh, you're so kind. Now, even if she's not being kind, even if she just wants my tip and couldn't care less, let's say, from her point of view, it doesn't matter, I don't care, she gave me what my attachment wanted. So unfortunately, I think our view of a person's being kind is if they do what your attachment wants, which again is so self-centered. It's just how we are, you know. So the point here is a bit different, which initially doesn't sound right to us. The point of saying your mum, or even anybody for that matter, because there's a second, in this number 3 point, there are two variations on the meditation, on the thinking. First is your mother's kind, but the second one is all beings are kind, which seems even more abstract, but I'll explain this one. But the idea of the mother, first of all, especially if you don't like your mum, if she's neurotic and miserable and been mean to you, which is very common, we have mean mummies, join the club, they're all samsaric, we're all, you know, don't think it's special. But I think one of our big problems here is, because we have this very strong assumption in our materialist world that the mother created me, therefore we think we didn't ask to get born, therefore we think we don't play any role in it, therefore we have this massive expectation, which is attachment, that she'd better do what I want every second. It's her job. I think this is really the basis of so much when we get so hurt by our parents or our mummy or whoever for that matter. It's based on our incredible own neediness to get our needs fulfilled. And the assumption with a mother is absolute, that it's her job. All the more because in our materialist world, we really do believe she made me. So there's quite a big responsibility. If you made somebody, you are responsible. So I think there's a stupendous sense of expectation we have, and therefore really angry with her. Rightly so, we think, when she doesn't do it. So, I remember when I was a little girl, like with your mummy when you begin, you're in love with your mother, basically. You've got all this attachment. She's the only person in the universe to you. So naturally, the neediness in us, which we get born with, don't forget that. This neediness in us, this attachment in us to get our needs fulfilled. I'm not talking about the reasonable part of it, I'm talking about the delusion. If that's very fierce, people are born with very intense attachment, then your expectations are going to be massive. And the millisecond she doesn't feed you on time, scream and kick and shout. Is it not? That's just not normal, as we'd say. That's because the attachment isn't getting what it wants. So if you've got very strong neediness, very strong attachment, very strong expectations, you're going to get disappointed very easily. And no matter what your mother does, even if she is a nice person from her side, you'll never be happy, you'll never be satisfied. Look at us, we can see this. So then because we assume as we get older, we believe that she made us, so we give her this immense responsibility to be perfect. We demand she be perfect. It's kind of fascinating, but we expect her to be perfect. And then how dare she be not perfect, you know? I remember the moment, it's very shocking actually, it's funny, the moment that my mother fell off the pedestal. It's a great term, you know. It's at the moment I started finding fault in my mother. Up until then I never found fault. She was perfect, my mum, you know. I remember the moment I started to find fault. I remember the moment anger started to come towards my mother, in other words. And it doesn't take long before I started to hate her as if she's the cause of all suffering on the universe, you know. So typical, isn't it? Not every person thinks that way about their mothers. Some people adore their mummies, you know, have until the day they die. So anyway, I'm a typical example. I'm going to blame my mother. I hate my mother because she didn't do what my attachment wanted naturally. So then what happens is because of delusions, like when I'm in love with Vasilis, he looks divine and I forget I don't notice his bad qualities. I gloss them all over. And then when he leaves me, all I see him is as a monster. So clearly attachment and aversion are exaggerators. We don't have a reasonable picture. The same with our mummy. First she was like a saint, and then she was like a mean person. Because attachment makes her divine, aversion makes her ugly. So when a person's ugly to us and you blame them, you forget all the good things. Well, I think if that's where we are, many people still this way when they're 40 and 50 and 60 and 80, hating their mothers, remembering the bad things, feeling oppressed by their mother, feeling guilty. It's because they haven't grown up themselves, basically, but we blame our mother, you know. And because the karmic connection with some people and the mother are very intense. Very oppressive. I mean, people have nightmares, you know, terrible relationships with their mothers. It's like a nightmare. They never get out of that prison. Some people have lovely relationships. We can see it, you know. So I think for any of us, anyway, it's a great thinking to do, to think differently. Even if it's just my enemy. Paros adored me once and now he hates me. Now I think he's horrible. But it's a really good exercise to remember the good things, which were all there. They haven't gone away, but we don't want to remember the good things. We only want to remember the bad. This is the way our minds are. So with our mummies, I think it's a great, really good kind of thinking to do. Remember the good things, literally, which then immediately softens the picture you have, of course, because the view you have of the person. The way they say it in Buddhist psychology is kind of interesting, but we can see it's so true. Everything out there, people or things, so obvious. It's how we've been talking all the time. The way they say it is, appear in the aspect of what's in our mind. It's not obvious. If attachment's here, he looks divine. If aversion's here, he looks ugly. So our mummy's the same. So it's a good exercise, I think. Just to simply, almost like make lists, you know. Now this starts with nothing grand, but the fact that she gave birth to you. God Almighty, I don't forget that. I mean, I can't believe that one, you know. Anybody who's given birth, you know about that one. That alone, somebody had you in the womb, you know, nurtured you, looked after you, had you caused so much pain when they gave birth to you. That's an incredible gift. And if, let's say, your mother gave you away after birth, you generally think in the world there's no reason that ever I would think she was kind to me. You're wrong. I aborted my child. Your mother didn't abort you. This is one reason to never forget your mother's kindness, even if you never met her again the rest of your life. She had a choice. And she just chose. One of my sisters, for example, 3 of us had abortions, and one of my sisters did not want an abortion. We'd say to her, come on, Judy, have an abortion, it's easy, come on. She refused. In the 60s, she had the baby when she was 17, then she gave it away, you know, to a nice family. Well, that girl probably is mad at my sister, you know. For many years she was. She's met her since that time. Blaming her, she gave me away. Many people who are adopted feel that way. I'm not being rude here. And that's part of the karma you created, to be given away. You created that cause. So the sense of loss, the sense of abandonment is very strong in some people. But my sister consciously chose not to abort her baby. That's pretty incredible. It's like a person runs across the road and saves your life under a bus. You'll never forget them as long as you live. Well, your mummy didn't kill you, baby. You're still alive. Yes, she gave you away. She didn't kill you. That's enough to make you weep every day with gratitude, But we don't think that way, do we? But so my mother, yes, my mother was neurotic. She had a lot of attachment. She had a lot of suffering with a ridiculous husband. She adored him, but there's dramas and things that happen, like all people's lives, depression, dramas, fights, suffering, not enough money. Suffering. Join the club, She had her own style, her way of dealing with depression. She made bad choices. Of course she did. She was deluded like me. But she did. And my feeling is all the more reason to appreciate what she did. Because it was extra hard for her. All the more reason. So in other words, to go past our own aversion, our own self-centeredness, our own hurt, our own unfulfilled wishes, all these things, and just simply observe what she did. She gave birth, she did this, she wiped my bottom, she dressed me every day, she educated me. All these things that we take for granted, that we assume, well, what do you mean she's kind? It's her job. It's not the point here. The point here about saying kind is simply the fact that she did anything at all. The fact that she did it. The fact that she did it. Not, oh, she's a kind person doing what I want. It's quite profound, really. And it shifts the view of the person. So naturally you have this gratitude. Naturally. So simple. This is not like emptiness. You don't have to squeeze your brain to do this. You just got to think differently, It's quite simple but profound. So people talk about doing these meditations for years. And then eventually they do this for every single sentient being. They talk about mother sentient beings. Every sentient being has been your mother, countless lives. It's just a technique to use to frame people so that you can learn to see if this mother's kind, then you can extrapolate others have been kind in the same way. The enemy, the friend, the snake, the dog, they've been your mother, countless lives. As animals, they've given their lives for you, countless lives. This is the Buddha's view. So it's kind of a powerful concept. But opens your heart to others. You see them differently. The other technique here, sort of like 3B, if you like, they say there's a more profound one for the mind to help us cultivate this incredible gratitude to sentient beings, and therefore the fourth point, the wish to repay their kindness, is the fact, is this other one, is that all beings are kind. Initially it's like a joke, clearly in the way we interpret it, just not true. But if you think it through, we can see the logic of it. It's based on the idea of interdependence. So you think, it's logical, it's scientific, you can't argue with it. Everything, the way to say it for me is, everything that has facilitated your very existence from the time you were conceived in your mother's womb, everything that's facilitated your existence since the time you began in your mother's womb is the handiwork of countless sentient beings. So if you think, just alone, I think the food my mother ate after I began to grow in her womb. Let's say she ate meat, and she did then, I think, ate meat and fish and things. Well, you think about it. Every single fish and chop and bull and cow and whatever she ate, turned into food, went into her body, and then transformed itself, did it not, into my little body. What is this body of mine inside my mother's womb that isn't part of her body, that isn't the result of all the fishes and the carrots and the tomatoes and the potatoes? In other words, a little mountain of fishes and cows growing in there. Is it not true, logically? It turns into my body, miraculously, that my mind is conjoined with. So the little Bobsy pops out. She popped out at 7 months, apparently. Impatient as usual. So little Bobsy popped out. My mother called me Bobsy. So there's this little body, So straight away we're having ego grasping and having attachment. It's my body. And if she squeezes me too tight, I squeal. because it's my body, and up to now we think this is my body. Well, excuse me, where's my body? Because forget about just the fetus. Since I'm born, all the food I've eaten up until now, might be vegetarian now, but look at all the billions of cows and fishes that I've eaten that have turned into my body. And even all the beings who died for the carrots and the tomatoes, they facilitated the food so I can have a body. So where's my body? Excuse me, how arrogant. This is the body we're talking about. So this is why, one story, one Lama told Kirti Senjam Rinpoche, who was in Greece actually when I was here in 92, wasn't it? He came in 92, wasn't it?
Lama Zopa.
Huh?
Lama Zopa.
Kirti Senjam Rinpoche.
Yes,
What year?
92.
92, right. I was here then, based in Athens, helping start a centre there, and based in Paros, helping the centre here. So anyway, he came, and I remember him saying, not in Greece, oh, by the way, it's a very interesting story. I don't know if you remember this, from Zelika, who was the director. It was really hard getting him a visa. And Zelika said that the immigration people said to her, this is the kind of person that we want to protect our Christian culture from. That's interesting, isn't it? But he got a visa eventually, reluctantly. They gave him a visa. This is the kind of person we want to protect our Christian culture from, they said. Anyway, whatever. So he said one time about a certain level of this bodhisattvas, realising emptiness, compassion, blah, blah, blah. In other words, such levels of compassion. And this again is a shocking concept. But he said, for that person, the action of cutting off their hand and feeding it to a starving animal is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. Meaning, if you can work it out, gone beyond ego completely, realised emptiness, no longer the sense of a neurotic self, no longer therefore the grasping at this self based on this body and mind. And then the development of this infinite levels of compassion that we're talking about here. Such compassion that all they see is starving. Clearly there's not a butcher shop around the corner. They wouldn't be stupid and cut their hand off if they could buy a pound of meat. No option. So no problems. Look, meat. Here, eat the other one while you're at it. We can't conceive of that level, You hear some of the stories about the saints, and that is what we're talking about here. But these are the methods of how to become like this. The Bodhisattva path. That level is what we're capable of accomplishing. So it's a really helpful one, this one, just alone, thinking of the body, This body that is the product of countless lives of sentient beings. But then you think of everything. My socks, always think of my socks, my navy blue socks. I like navy blue, knee-high socks. I don't like the ankle ones, I can't stand them. I don't like other colours. You can never get maroon that matches, and I like the maroons to match. These aren't matching, I'm a bit distressed about that, but never mind. I like navy blue because it matches my navy blue here, look. I know I sound silly, but look, see? There's my navy blue. I wear navy blue shoes, but I have a black computer case. I just I figure, well, if I'm going to walk around the world looking like a 14th century something, which is 14th century, it might as well look respectable, Anyway, whatever. So my navy blue socks, I like my navy blue socks. So they have to be schoolgirl socks, because men's socks are ridiculous. The toes come up to here, I've got to fold them over, that's no good. So I know what I want. So when I go to the shop and I ask for the knee-high navy blue socks and they give them to me, of course I'm going to thank them very much. Oh, you're so kind, because my attachment got what he wanted. But then if I think the other way, well, listen, start to think of all the people involved in these navy blue socks. Well, first of all, there's the person who designed them, Thank you, kind designer, for conceiving of a navy blue sock that I want. How amazing. This person somewhere in God knows what country, designed these particular socks. It didn't fall off a tree. It came out of a human mind. Then the people in the factory, all the people, they're not thinking about me. That's not the point. The fact that they did it. Then there's the people who made the Singer sewing machine. Then there's the people who made the polyester and joined it with the cotton. Then there's the cotton that came in the ground and they grew somewhere and all the creatures died. These are all the dependent arisings that come together to produce my stocks to keep my little tootsies warm. Is this not true? This is a scientific fact. Countless beings. Then it came to the shop, then there's hanging in the shop those little hangers, Someone designed the little hanger, especially for the socks. I mean, how kind of them. Instead of having them all bundled in a drawer, you've got to drag them out. They're all nice. They've got little labels. Somebody designed the label. Somebody did the type font, did the typesetting. Somebody designed the type font. Somebody wrote the sentence and proofread it. And they explain, this is for size something, schoolgirls, knee-high. How kind they are, helping me understand there's my sock, as opposed to this one, which is for men. Everything is done by humans, and all the creatures who die. Everything is the handiwork of countless sentient beings. This is not complicated, but whoever thinks it? We don't. Why? Because in the forefront of my mind is my craving to get what I want, and within that I'm prepared to say thank you if it's what I want. But if I open up the socks and they're too long, I'll be complaining, you know. Bloody socks, and design them properly. These designers, blah, blah, blah. You communicating with me? I mean, this is just to do this meditation alone, seriously thinking it through. And why would you think it through? Guess what? It's true. It's not holy, it's true. But we don't see the truth. This is the point. This is true. This is fact. Buddha doesn't own this. Just these dudes over the centuries constructed these little ways of thinking to help us shift ego's absurd misconceptions, you know. This is the function. This is not mystical. This is not something magical. We think of meditation as about you close your eyes, have a big feeling about some person, it's all gooey and tears come. But this doesn't last long enough. It's like having no theories and you've got come into intuition for music and you put your hands on the piano and a lovely piece comes out. I'm so happy that I'll say to you, do it again. Oh, no, I can't do that. Well, then you haven't stabilised it, have you? Thinking these ways are ways of stabilising these realizations when you will have tears in your eyes. They talk about a bodhisattva called always crying one. He just saw a sentient being. He sees a tree, he sees a sock, and he bursts into tears because he thinks of all the beings he'd made. It's like a mother for her child. It's a good example. My mother, like all mummies, saved everything her children ever did, said, thought, wrote, drew, blinked at, you know. Isn't it? Mothers do this. I always remember a stupid painting her little Bobsy did when she was 5. I don't know why I remember it, I do. You know what mothers are like, my darling mummy adoring her little Bobsy. Bobsy had this stupid little painting of a pot plant. And little Bobsy called it a pop plan. Do you understand? Little 5-year-old pop plan. So mummy just adored this. Well, if you saw that in a second-hand shop, you'd chuck it in the bin. In itself, no intrinsic value. But when my mother saw it, her heart beat, because that little drawing was beating with her Bobsy, wasn't it? Do you understand? If her Bobsy had made her a pair of socks that were badly made, she wouldn't care. She'd adore them, because she could see that the handiwork of her Bobsy, that's a bodhisattva for everything. Everything is the handiwork of sentient beings. And all this is a truth anyway, but someone's using this truth to help move the heart, that's all. It's not set in stone. You can come up with any contemplation you like to get to move your heart, to go beyond self-cherishing, to cherish others. But this is a particular system of little techniques that have come from 1,000 years since Shantideva in India says blah, 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 blah. You know? So just to remember it every now and again is incredible, especially when you're miserable. Especially when you're in the cafe and you order the cake and the lousy cake comes. Just remember that still somebody made it, people made it. There's still the eggs the chickens gave and the butter that the cows gave and the flour that people did and ground in the factory, the person with a little constipation worried about her husband hating her and she ground the flour for you. You should be weeping in happiness. Thank you, lady. I've got a piece of cake here. Yeah, it's stale. It softens the heart, you know. You just got to remember, that's all. Everything you see, there's nothing you see, there's no road sign, the thing on the road itself, the microphone, that screw, that thing there, this plastic bag, this box, that thing, you know, the coffee, the cup, everything you see, there's nothing that isn't the handiwork of sentient beings. There can't be. It's kind of powerful. So naturally the next step, 4th one, I must repay their kindness. Make this determination, continue working on myself. Continue developing myself so I can repay their kindness. This is like great love, you know. May they be happy and I'm going to make it happen. Then there's a few other little techniques to help us get to this. I'm just going to get to the main one here. The one that's like the 9th, 10th step or something, 9th. That they call this meditation where you are the actual one, the technique that actually is the one where you do this exchanging self for others, coming on the basis of these other techniques. And this one, they call it in Tibetan, Tong Len, giving, taking. And you can do it in a formal way, but like all of this stuff, it's an attitude that you can cultivate. So this one, you can do it in your meditation. And what it is, you know, you visualize somebody in front of you, let's say, with a headache, anybody, your dearest friend. You start with your dearest friend, and then graduate to enemies. You graduate after that to your enemies. But it's just simple. You can think of a person in front of you with a headache. And what you're doing in this meditation is real simple, technically. What you're doing is You're imagining their suffering, and then you're going to breathe in, take upon yourself their suffering. You breathe in their suffering, their headache, like yucky smoke that you breathe in, and you imagine, if you like, there's different ways of doing it, like a little rocket your heart, like your self-cherishing, your selfishness, your self-centeredness, and it kind of cracks it away, chips away at it. Then you breathe out, blissful light, and you give them your health, your wealth, your happiness, your goodness. You give it to them. So the taking one is where you're cultivating compassion. Because you're not only, you see, this is where the levels of compassion. Compassion is, may you not suffer. The next one is great compassion. What can I do to take it away? And then this one is like a bonus on top. It says, you know what? I'd rather have it than you. You hear stories like this all the time, especially parents. You hear they say that, I would rather have that suffering. I wish I could take upon myself their suffering. I wish they were free of suffering and I had it. That's what this is. So the point about this technique, it's not as if you're trying to get a headache. Don't misunderstand it. It's not as if you're trying to heal the person. This is not a healing technique. This is a simple technique, like a practice for you to develop this incredible courage, this attitude, that if I could, I would rather have the headache than you. I mean, this is really outrageous, isn't it? We can have compassion. We can even say, what can I do to help? But to actually say, I'd rather have it than you, this is beyond stupendous, So it's an amazing practice, just to think it. You don't have to do it yet. Don't worry about it. You're practicing, you're training. You're like in the back roads training for the freeway. It's a training. It's a technique. It's not to get a headache. That's ridiculous. And it's not to heal. There's lots of healing techniques, not this one. This is an amazing technique for you to develop the courage of this phenomenal compassion and love. The love is the giving and the compassion is the taking. Can you hear it? The point. A lot of people in the West love this meditation. I think it's amazing. It's incredible. So you don't have to sit there in formal meditation to do it. You just think it. Every now and again, you just think it. You see a homeless person. It's like using your creative imagination, but not in a soupy, sentimental way, in a powerful, real way. I mean, you see a homeless person, and first of all, the first thought we have is, thank God I'm not homeless, which is fantastic. But then even more profound, you can go, I would rather be homeless than him. Even just to have the thought is always scary, isn't it? Because we know we don't want it, really. But just to say that, just having the thought, I'd rather, even before you go further and imagining it, just the thought is like an atomic bomb on self-centeredness. It's powerful. Don't be nervous, don't be afraid of it. Of course, if you could, you would go and exchange places. You could, you would. But that eventually comes. If it's appropriate, you'd do that without a second thought. But it's just a thought. It's to have the thought. There's just the thought of it is so profound because it's completely opposite to the instinct of ego. The opposite. It's extraordinary, for the mind. Such a powerful. And remember, every thought counts. Every thought sows a seed. Every thought has a function. So a powerful thought like that puts an atomic bomb under the opposite thoughts. So be happy with just the thought. Just to walk past and think, I would rather be homeless than you. It's just stupendous, Don't be afraid of it. You're not ready to do it yet. That's okay. Got to start with a thought, though. They have a saying in Tibetan, everything exists on the tip of the wish. So this Tonglen, I missed a few that, I just went to the first four, and then this is like the 8th. And the 9th, what this brings is then powerful love and compassion, and then culminates in the 11th, which is bodhicitta. So there's a few in between. I just want to mention these ones, And people go off into retreat for years, accomplishing, perfecting these, to the point where they actually experientially have accomplished these stages, to the point where they actually achieve what they call bodhicitta. And you can keep practicing. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Any questions here? Please. About anything? What I said this morning?
I kind of have a question.
Yes, Claire.
So you're practicing the meditation for years and years to experientially be able to have it flow.
Genuinely do it, yes. Be stable. Like playing the piano, you perfected it, yes. Yes.
And the practice of doing that, you're perfecting
that. Whatever that is, whichever one you're practicing.
Whatever that is.
Yeah, if it's equanimity, it becomes genuine.
The act of perfecting perfecting that, is the energy of the perfecting that also going out?
Oh, of course it does. It can't help but do, because that's the consequence, isn't it? You don't just think it perfectly and then not do it. You just don't think music perfectly and then not do it. You can't possibly have equanimity in your heart but not express it in the way you behave. It naturally extends to your behaviour. Of course it does. That's the point. You can't keep it here and not do it. Impossible. Impossible. So let me give you an example of this one of Tong Len. I'll give you an example. Okay. There's this friend of mine called Harry, who's an American. He's a meditator, off in the mountains for many years, you know, and he lives with another... And when you meet him, he's just this jolly, friendly guy. Big guy with a big beard, like a big bear of a guy, who's always smiling and cracking jokes, and he just looks like a friendly bloke, you know. But everyone says, wow, you know, Harry's a bodhisattva. Well, I don't know. When I heard this story, I figured maybe he is. So, okay, here's the story. I love this story. Years ago at Kopan Monastery, our monastery in Kathmandu Valley, I mentioned before that Lama Zopa Lama actually started in the 70s. In the 90s, I think this was, I don't remember. Harry Harry would spend many years in the caves up in the area where Lama Zopa comes from, in the Sherpa part of, in Nepal. He's got a cave up there that he goes to meditate. Years and years he's been up there, down there, comes down again, goes back up again. So at some point he was preparing to go back up from Kathmandu Valley to walk up the mountain. It takes about 10 days, 12 days, I forget, I haven't been up there, and then go to his cave and do more meditation. These types of meditation, plus meditation, emptiness, and all the rest. Perfecting the path, in other words. So anyway, the story goes, Lama Zopa was there and heard that Harry was going, had left, but he had a dream, Lama Zopa said, that Harry would die. And he tried to get a message, but it was too late. Well, first of all, I want to comment here, Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself is said to be a highly realised being who never sleeps. These great yogis and meditators and compassionate beings, bodhisattvas, don't need sleep. So he couldn't have had a dream because he doesn't sleep, he's just being humble, you know. Obviously he has clairvoyance and he can see that this is how they talk. This clairvoyance is fairly low-level realisation. Buddha says we've had clairvoyance in countless lives, you know, from meditating and all these things, but we've lost it, you know. So anyway, they tried to get a message to Harry, but he was gone. There was no mobiles in those days, so couldn't get a message. So Lama Zopa then asked his friend Geshe Lama Kontrog, the one I mentioned before, who's up in the caves meditating for years and years, naked, no food, no sleep, this highly evolved being. He was a Kopan by this point, and Lama Zopa asked him to pray for Harry. So the story goes, I'd heard about it, there was one other nun who was with Harry, but then I asked Harry himself directly, years later, tell me what happened. So basically he's walking up the mountain with his big pack, you know, and these mountains are treacherous. I've never been up there. But people dropping off the mountain all the time, especially the poor porters, you know, these Sherpa porters with these gigantic packs on their backs. One of my friends used to do it, and he said, Robina, all you do is see your feet for 10 days, you know, you're bent over like this. So these really treacherous little paths, really treacherous, where you fall off the cliff. So anyway, Harry's going up, he said, because I asked him, please tell me what happened. So he's walking up the mountain and he sees these 4 Sherpas coming down, and it's really close and very intense and very narrow. And there's nowhere to turn, you know. So he said, the first thought that came into my mind was, okay, 4 of them, 1 of me, okay, 4 is more than 1, and this is one of the techniques that they talk about in the development of all these compassionate things. He stepped to the side. I'll step to the side, he said, near the edge of the cliff. Now, naturally, if we think in the world, you know, instinct for survival, the first thing you do is go up against the cliff and hope they don't fall off. Naturally. It would be too terrifying for most of us if we haven't practiced. If they were our precious children, for sure we might have let them go on the edge. We would go on the outside for our children. But these are strangers, 4 Sherpas. So he said the first thought, I will step to the side. So he stepped to the edge of the cliff to let them pass. And it's also intense and so close, and there's nowhere to turn, you know. He then said to himself, if they knock me, I won't hold on. Now that's even more insane. Do you agree? So put it this way, if you haven't practiced in your mind doing these meditations seriously to the point where you actually effortlessly can have that thought, this thought wouldn't naturally arise for a stranger. We hear stories about people, but the Buddha would say that's because they've practiced it in a past life. But the tendency would be to run down the stairs while the tower is collapsing rather than running up. But we heard about those firemen, didn't we? Who run up the stairs into the fire to save people. But I mean, incredible, you know. So this is Harry. He then said, if they knock me, I won't hold on. Which means he was prepared to give his life. Without a second thought. No drama, just the thought. So what my point here before I go further is there's no way unless you're trained, you know. It's like trying to play tennis with Federer. You can't unless you've trained. Well, you can't do this unless you've changed your mind to this fundamental degree by doing these thinking things through to the point where it now is experiential, stably, not every now and again, which is how we think of love and compassion. We think of great compassion as something that comes and then goes again. It's like I said, you put your hands on the piano and a beautiful piece comes and then one day it doesn't come. That's because you haven't stabilised your realisations of piano playing. When you realise that you can do it every time, that's the same approach here. These techniques are to get us to perfect these realisations. So then indeed they knocked him. Didn't mean to. They're walking so intensely with their big huge packs trying not to fall off the bloody mountain. And he gets knocked. And his feet are on the ground, he said. And his big pack is pulling him. And he said, and these are exact words, I had a psychic vision of the entire fall, he said.
What?
A psychic vision of the entire fall and saw my body crash to the ground. But then he said, he kept falling, his feet are still on the ground, but then he said he felt the hands of Geshe Lama Kontrok very powerfully push him, and he reversed direction and fell into the Sherpas, you know. So, I think he's a bodhisattva. I would suggest he's perfected a few of these things. That would seem to me to suggest, you know, that perhaps he has got some realizations. But this also indicates the power. For example, this Geshe Lama Kontrok who spent years and years and years in meditation, doesn't need sleep, food, all the rest. Lama Zopa said he lives in Vajrayogini's Pure Land. Vajrayogini is one of these Buddhas I'm going to talk about in Tantra, which we're getting to before we finish today. And he perfected that practice, you know. So anyway, okay, that's an example of Tonglen. You've perfected.
Back to basics.
Yes, Melanie. Yeah, exactly.
What do you do if you feel judgment at whatever level?
I understand, exactly.
What?
Exactly, perfect question, Melanie. I think if we look into our minds, you're so right, it's happening all the time in us, isn't it? Even for our best friends. Like you can be my best friend, and I'm talking to you, and I'm smiling at you while I'm listening, but I'm part of me saying, oh, she looks a bit old these days, or her neck's a bit wrinkled, or, you know, I mean, we can't help it. We just can't help finding fault because our mind is dualistic, we have attachment, we have aversion. So it depends on what level you're at. But one of the first things, when we see the judgment, see the criticism. Okay, first of all, I think we should be very clear here. There's a difference between seeing what's true and then judging. So, you know, let's say you're my friend and I'm an alcoholic. To say, oh my God, Robina's an alcoholic, that's not judgment. That's a truth. But as to how you interpret that, that's when the judgment comes. Look at that wretched Robina, she's an alcoholic, how dare she do. Whereas, you see my point. So seeing there's a war there, and there's violence there, and rapists there, and terrorists there, that's not judgment, that's fact. It's then a question of how you interpret that. So judgment would be that Robina being an alcoholic, how dare she, you know, I wouldn't be like that, that kind of thing. So then if you're seeing what's true, then the first step is, you know, the wisdom wing approach, the wisdom ring. This is what I do. I try to do this. I have two little sayings I say to myself. Because when, you know, in the wisdom wing, we're not talking compassion wing yet, that's more advanced, and that's another answer, and I'll give it to you in a second. But the first one, when I see the world out there, all the suffering, the harm, the dramas, the pedophiles, you know what, and I read about all the time on my iPad, I see it, I don't try to be afraid of it, try not to be shocked. For me, I use the view of karma to explain why they're doing it, to me, straight away. But the other one is, instead of finding fault or criticising, I will say two things. Either one, I will say, I recognise that. Meaning, I'm not a pedophile, but I recognise attachment. You understand my point? I don't go and kill 27 people, but I recognise anger. So straight away that stops me from putting myself outside, separate from people. And then the other one I say is, thank you for showing me how not to be. Then immediately it becomes a teaching for me, not some me standing outside perfect, pointing fingers at these people. That I think is really huge. Really huge. Immediately, you know, you bring it back as a learning for yourself, as a learning for you. That makes it rich. Then the other one, more advanced, will be the compassion. On the basis of the fact that you understand why you do stupid things, you know why they do stupid things, their past karma, their delusions, and look at the harm they're doing to others because of it, and therefore look at the suffering they're causing themselves. So, you understand? But the first one's quite powerful, I think. Because we tend to talk about they all the time. They, you know, they, this, people that. It's easy for us to fall into that trap. It's true, people do, but I always prefer to, a third one, I always prefer to say we. I never say they, I say we. That helps. Do you understand? I think that alone, forget the compassion, is very powerful. It already softens me and makes me know I'm part, which is like compassion. We're all part of the same crazy world, you know. Does that make sense? Good. Thank you. Very nice question. What else, folks? Oh, it's only 12:15. Okay, what else? Okay, so these ones of compassion, I'll just touch so briefly on these techniques, you know. A few of these little techniques. So that on the basis of all these, practicing junior school, controlling your body and speech, abiding by the laws of karma, purifying, that's what I think I want to talk about now. Go into more detail about this practice we do that we call purification, which is like junior school practice. So like I said before, then I'll get to, after lunch, I'll talk about more of the most advanced postgraduate Vajrayana, these practices of seeing ourselves as a Buddha, as a method for becoming a Buddha. They're wonderful. I'll talk about these visualization practices we do, which includes mantra and things, which is from the Vajrayana. So here the purification practice is so tasty, you know. I think in your notes there's a teaching about it, how we create karma and how we purify karma. But there's also a practice, the way you can incorporate that into a little practice that we would do at the end of the day. As Lama Zopa says, we are insane not to do this practice every day. So it really just consists of 4 practical steps. And one of my friends, she calls it the 4 R's. It's easy to remember. Regret, reliance, the remedy, resolve. I'll explain. It's in your notes. It's all in those printed notes. In the notes. How you purify karma. I think it's there. You'll see. In depth. All the things I'm going to say now are there in more depth. Okay. So given, remember, Buddha's view that everything we think and do and say programs our mind, sows seeds in the mind. Nothing goes astray. And given that everything that's called negative, which is coming from this unhappy ego grasping, which causes attachment and anger and all the misery, naturally the actions we do informed by those are going to pollute our mind, cause suffering to me. And that every time we do anything that's virtuous and positive, which is informed by positive motivation, will purify my mind, grow my mind to be purer and wiser. You know? We can mould our mind in any shape we like, as Lama Zopa says. So, given that the first step then of recognising this is stop harming others, at least stop sowing more seeds that will ripen as my suffering. But even more than that, we've got to start taking care of all the seeds we've already planted in the past that will ripen as suffering before they ripen. So we've got to stop sowing the weeds, and we've got to pull out the weeds we've already grown, or the seeds before they become weeds. So that's what purification means. So it's all based on this simple process of every minute we do anything, think anything, we're sowing seeds, we're creating karma, we're moulding our minds. So the purification one, the first one, is regret. We mentioned this briefly. It isn't guilt. We know guilt really well. Guilt is, I'm so naughty, I did this, I did that, I did this, and I'm a bad person. But we can see, isn't it, it's exactly anger, except it's you instead of others. If it's anger, you did this, and you did that, and you did this, and you're a bad person. That's exactly what it is. Guilt is internalized anger. It really is. It's a terrible, painful, awful thing to do to ourselves. And it's just not appropriate. It's not valid. It's too extreme. It's not accurate. It's exaggeration. You're not bad. It's ridiculous. The action is not cool. That's more precise, you know. So what regret is instead is, you know, you look into the past and you recognise, well, today I killed, lied, bad-mouthed, jumped on somebody else's partner, stole, whatever it might be. Today, yesterday, this life. And then you take some that you do remember. We've done billions of things. You take some of these things. And the point is you acknowledge that you did do it. So that already is a huge step. We can't even bear to acknowledge because we're desperately fighting to get off the hook. We're desperately trying and find a reason we did it, and it's not my fault, it's his fault, her fault, their fault, I can't help it. We can't just have the courage to simply own the fact that I shot my mouth off yet again, without feeling guilty. This takes time, I tell you. Just acknowledge the bare fact. Robina, there you go again, babe. So the real point about regret, it's like compassion for yourself. So how it sounds is, when you acknowledge it, come kicking and screaming to eventually be able to acknowledge it. I did shout Paros yet again. So, you're tired of it, you're exhausted from it, you feel bad about it because here you go, you're scared of it because you think it's just your nature. But instead of guilt, you think, you know what, Robina, I regret this from the depths of my heart because you know why? I am sick of the suffering it causes me. I'm not thinking of compassion yet. That's number 2. You've got to recognize this is what harms you. Not beating, not blame, not punishment, not this brutal kind of beating fingers, bashing, you're bad, you're wrong. Not that. It's kind of kindness. We all know this. I mean, the number of people you read who hear about, we know, who, like say, have alcoholic. And eventually they got so low, they think this is too much. Finally, I realise the suffering is unbearable and I have to change. This is like that. That's all. It's compassion for yourself. Finally, you're realising that your anger, your harming, your lying, your killing, your stealing, that's what causes you such misery. In other words, you've got to be sick of the suffering. You've got to acknowledge that that's what causes you suffering. Yes, Paros might be a creep. That's not the issue here. Own our part of it. But this itself takes time. It's already so grown up, We're being accountable. We're being responsible. We're not being brutal to ourselves. Please hear this. It's like kindness to yourself. Recognising that your delusions, because of habit, you're born with them, don't worry, don't be depressed. And then because of ridiculous behaviour, out of control, you messing up again. I'm sick of this. You've got to be sick of it. You've got to be up to here with it. So then you say, I regret this from the depths of my heart because I'm sick of the suffering. This is so profound, So of course it grows and grows every day. Better and better. Braver and braver. And this, of course, then you can say, you remember the bad thing, a few things, and then you can think of your own neuroses, your jealousy, just the states of mind that inform your ridiculous actions, that break your heart. And then you can even, if you like, think of, taking the view that you've got beginningless lives. It might work for everybody, but if you're a Buddhist, then you think, and then whatever I've done since beginningless time, all the killing, all the harming, all the lying, all the bad mouthing, since beginningless time, all of which have sown seeds in my mind, I regret this from the depths of my heart because I don't want the future suffering. That's the point of regret. Just to say I regret it is not enough. You've got to say, because I don't want the suffering. They use the analogy of having eaten poison. Of course you say, oh my God, what an idiot, I can't believe I ate poison. Why do you say that? Because you know it's implied it'll cause you suffering. You don't regret it because it's naughty. You don't regret it because someone will punish you. No, you regret it from this most instinctive, natural response. Oh my God, I don't want suffering. Of course I regret it. It's natural because I don't want the suffering. You've got to get used to saying that. We're not used to thinking this. We just get guilty. You've got to say because I'm sick of the suffering. It's like the bellyache from the poison. That's regret. It's very wholesome, very grown up. And in these types of meditations, there's nothing holy about it. You're talking to yourself. You're being your own friend. You're sitting on your chair in the evening. You don't wallow in the misery before you get 5 minutes. You just remember the things. I regret from the depths of my heart because I don't want suffering. Then you think, well, whom can I turn to? Quick, where's the doctor? Who's got the antidote to the poison? Very simple. This gets us to reliance, the second one. And the first part of it is where we have what we call in Buddhism, take refuge. It really, you remind yourself of your doctor. In this context, the Buddha is our doctor, for those who are Buddhists, So this is where the huge difference between the relationship between God, your creator, and the Buddha is like your mentor. He's not your creator. You create yourself. He's just a guy who's got knowledge about all the poisons and has some antidotes for you. He's a good doctor, basically. So naturally you're delighted to find a good doctor. If you know you've taken poison. If you don't think you're suffering, you don't care about some fancy doctor. Oh, there's a great doctor in Iceland, is there, who knows every single method to get rid of all poisons? Wow, I'm very impressed. Who cares? Until you realise you've taken poison. Then you've got to hang on every word he says. So you've got to, the point about refuge, in general, a person who, this is now aside from the purification practice, but there's this discussion for people who, when they feel they're ready to want to become a Buddhist, let's say. That means you're going to formally take refuge in, as they call it. Rely upon the Buddha and his practices. So the basis of this is obvious, like going to a doctor. You don't go to a doctor because you've got a cute nose. You go to a doctor for two reasons. One, you want medicine because you're either sick or you want to prevent it. And two, because you know with confidence that you've checked up that he's a good doctor. That's reasonable. So that the implication here is you've checked up on the Buddha, you like the Buddha's teachings, and you're prepared to, you want to rely upon them. So there's a way of formalising, if a person wants, formalising one's commitment to the Buddha and his teachings. That's one's own decision. So in this context here, one remembers the Buddha, one's doctor, and then one visualises above one's head the Buddha in a particular form. There's a certain way we talk about the Buddha, which I'll talk later after lunch. And we visualise. We sort of remember be delighted you found a good doctor. The second part of this step, called reliance, it's kind of curious. It's where you now have compassion for those you've harmed with your body and speech, due to your ridiculous delusions. So why reliance? It sounds peculiar to put it under the head. What do you mean rely? Well, they talk a lot, the way they talk, the Tibetans especially, they say, in order to get compassion, which is pretty obvious, you need suffering sentient beings. You rely upon suffering sentient beings. You don't want them to suffer, but if you never met a suffering sentient being, how could you have compassion? Because compassion is empathy with the suffering of others. So in that sense, they say bodhisattvas need suffering sentient beings. There's grist for their mill. So in that sense, they talk about relying upon sentient beings. It's just the way they frame it. It really just means here you now think of those you have harmed. You regret now for their sake. First for your own. First. Because when you know about suffering, you can now empathise with other people's suffering. When you realise the karmic connection, that Paros has harmed me in the past, I'm harming him now, and I have now compassion for him. And even if you're brave enough, you can also have compassion for those who've harmed you, which could include, your friend. Of course it is. Why? Because they're harming themselves by harming you, and they'll suffer in the future. It's like a compassion a mother has for her junkie kid, No one else can stand him. He's a pain in the bum, as we say in Australia. But his mother, her heart breaks because she can see he's harming himself. This is the key to compassion. Sentient beings are harming themselves. Then the third step is you take the remedy. So here, anything you do that would be an antidote to whatever you're regretting, you do it in your daily life. Because the point about this is, we have this very strong feeling, ego-grasping, concrete, set in stone, I'm bad. Very common. I'm bad. So we even though we might do some practices like this, we tend to think, well, I'm still bad. What good is that doing? Talk about set in stone. It's how we are. But you know yourself very well. If you're learning piano, and the status quo is you can't play the notes, that's called bad. Just think that way. Every time you play the right note, you're lessening the bad, aren't you? Every time you play the right note, you're developing the habit to play the right note, and you're undeveloping the habit to play the wrong note. So the minute you do the opposite, this one weakens. So every time you have love, you weaken anger. Every time you think of others, you're lessening your thinking of yourself. So immediately you're purifying. Right there, that very thought is an antidote. So this is a kind of a way of formalising powerful antidotes. So if you let's say regret killing, the fishing, the abortion, whatever, in your daily life immediately, if you just save the life of one ant, it's incredible practice. It's the opposite to killing. Help others, help sick people. That's an immediate antidote. There's no question, it's obvious. But there are certain practices that all the Tibetan lamas would praise as very potent medicines, remedies if you like. And these often, and this might be not evident to us in the beginning, they often involve the use of mantra and the visualization of Buddhas, enlightened beings. They say the power of enlightened energy is so intense that just imagining it, connecting with it, visualizing it, repeating the mantras is really potent, tasty medicine for our mind, So this third step, a traditional one in our culture, in Tibetan Buddhism, is a practice of the Buddha called Vajrasattva, which we'll talk about after lunch. The meaning of the Buddhas. And you say a certain mantra and you visualize nectar coming, completely purifying all the actions of your body. Then you visualize nectar coming, purifying all your speech, things like this. It's very tasty. It's your mind doing it. As Lama Yeshe said, we create negativity with our mind. So we can purify it by creating positivity with our mind. Every time you think positive thoughts, you're weakening delusions. Every time you do these strong visualizations, don't think it's just, it's only in the mind. That's how we think in the West, It's only in the mind. But it's the opposite for the Buddha. It's in the mind, yes. That's where it happens. So tasty. The fourth one is the main one, as one Lama said. It's where you make decisions to change, resolve. So, if you're a Buddhist, you've taken refuge formally, you've taken the 5 lay vows, the vow not to kill, not to lie, not to steal, etc. Well, not to cheat on your partner, and not sexual misconduct, they call it, and then not to take intoxicants. You can take any or all of these 5 vows. So if you've taken these vows, and Buddha really is into vows, I'll talk about this in a minute, why they're so potent, then you would reiterate those vows every day. So it's like doing push-ups every day. You keep getting better at it, obviously. But if you don't do them anymore, you'll forget. Well, the same here. Then at the end, you will say, I will never kill again. I will never lie again. I will never steal again. So you're strengthening that, and you're digging deeper and deeper, that groove in your mind, because mind is intention. So if every day you reiterate your intention, I will never kill, guess what? You won't kill. It's hardly rocket science. You remind yourself of your vow. We know how vows are strong. If I'm living with Vasilis, we're just hanging out, we cheat on each other. No, cheat, we decide. Just go here, go there, do. But then one day we decide, we commit to each other. We look each other in the eye, we're like, we made a contract. I will not sleep with anybody else, I will take care of you, blah, blah, blah. People do this. It's called, relationships, marriage and stuff. Well, immediately it's more powerful, isn't it? Because if I start looking at other people, I remember my vow. I say, come on, Robina, stop it. You committed to Vasilis, don't cheat. It's clearly obvious when you make a strong commitment to do something, you will do it more likely. I always remember years ago when I was living in London in the 80s, I did martial arts, right? I really love martial arts. Throughout my life I was doing martial arts. And I got really fit. I mean, the fittest I've ever been in my life, Not much, the fat was low and the muscle tone was strong. And I was, being a fanatic, I was training 6 days a week, of course. So I was fit as a fiddle, loved my kung fu. And I'd never been fitter, and felt more healthy, So then, of course, I stopped kung fu, I got fat again. It's just my tendency, I get fat, because I like food. And also because my metabolism, it's very funny, isn't it? My metabolism is bizarrely, profoundly, unnaturally slow. You'd think my metabolism would be fast. I have to eat about a peanut a day and I'm healthy, It's most disappointing when you're attached to food, isn't it? Anyway, whatever. But the point is, and suddenly time goes quickly. It was 35 years since I did my kung fu. No, not quite 35, 20 or something, year 8. And I say to myself every now and again over the years, oh God, I should lose weight, Do you understand? Oh, I should lose weight. And then one day I decided, this is actually 2 years ago, I've done it a couple of times, you do this, don't you? A couple of years ago, I didn't say I should lose weight, I suddenly said to myself, well, you know what, Robina, I will lose weight. And guess what? Guess what happened? Precisely, because I said I will lose weight. This is intention, It's hardly rocket science. I made a decision. Oh, I should, I will, maybe, I might, I feel like I shouldn't, I can't. All the wishy-washy rubbish. I just decided I will, so I did. That's what I'm saying. So commitment, vow. So in the Buddhism, there's a whole tradition of taking commitments and taking vows. They talk about, and Buddha loves vows. He's big on vows. There's a whole body of Buddhist teachings called the Vinaya, which is all his body of instructions that have developed over the years when he had his monks and all this began to grow. Laws come out of necessity, don't they, in a way, So all these things. And so what he said was, what I say, is that vows are a very powerful, formal decision that you make. First of all, it was in front of the Buddha, and then it was in front of his representatives. And even now, when you formally take refuge, you take it in front of somebody who for you is the Buddha, like representing the Buddha. Because, I got it from my Lama, who got it from his. It's like this unbroken chain right back to the Buddha. And the Buddha talks about even people who have vows, who live in vows of morality. It's like a subtle physical form that is visible to clairvoyance. There's something so tasty, so powerful about living in, consciously, intentionally vowing to not harm, not lie, not kill, not steal. It just sounds so passive in a way, merely not kill. But it's because a vow is so tasty. Whereas if you didn't have a vow, karma, remember, is the meaning of karma is the word intention. So if you don't have a vow, and here we are being very nice people in this room, let's say we're not killing anything, and mainly we're not killing because due to our past virtue, no sentient beings are here attacking us, demanding we kill them. So we think we're nice people. We are nice people, we're not killing. But, we're sitting on our laurels from past life. Whereas so that we're not creating any merit, any virtue, we're not changing our mind at all until you have the thought, I will not kill. And the only time we have that is when the being pops up on our knee, or the mouse comes, or the mosquito comes, and we say, I won't kill it. It's that moment you create the virtue of non-killing, when you have the intention of non-killing. Only then. The rest of the times we're resting on our laurels, not much virtue has been created. But, the Buddha says, and Lama Zopa is big on this one, when you've taken a vow not to kill, and you live according to it every day, you really mean it sincerely, and it informs your actions, and then you purify every day, and then you continue to vow, I will never kill. The way the Buddha says is, 24 hours a day you've got this vow. It's ticking over virtue in your mind, and you're purifying your mind like a rocket boost. It's intensely powerful. The power of vows, they say. It's interesting, psychologically, you know. So living in vows, refraining from harming in the context of vows, and purifying every day, and learning to harness your physical and verbal, and beginning to harness your crazy mind. This is junior school practice. This is already stupendous. Do not think it is not. This is junior school. Already you will die with a happy mind. You will die very happily, and you programmed your mind to take a very nice next future rebirth, and you keep on bopping, practicing your spiritual path to Buddha. You can die relaxed, you know, because you've sown all the right seeds. Because you're the one who creates your future life, nobody else. It's not potluck. It's not someone else. It's not punishment. It's not reward. You plan it. You do it like a gardener. It's kind of a shock to hear this, you know. Time's going very slow today. Any questions about this process so far? Just brief, we've done it. I'll try and maybe do the meditation later, or do some kind of visualization practice later, I promise you, before we finish. Yes, Melanie?
Sorry, back to practical life.
Yes.
Lying is something, all the commandments as such, you
Sure.
make a vow not to do them,
Yes.
I shall not lie.
Yes.
And then our human nature,
Yes,
we lie, we
Yes.
know we're lying.
that's right.
How can we lessen
Yeah.
how can we get more consciousness that, oh, you just said
I understand. This is the point, Melanie, about this process. When you sit down in the evening and you own, without guilt or neurosis, I do lie, I did lie yet again. How ridiculous. This is the whole point I'm saying. This is why this process is exactly the answer. You first acknowledge it and you realise it's causing you suffering. Then you go to the second step and you have compassion for those you lie to. Then you do some purification. But the fourth step is when you make a promise. And maybe it's an old habit, so you don't lie to yourself by saying, I'll never do it again. Maybe you'll say, I will not do it for 24 hours. And it really is as practical as that. It is as practical as that. Not just, because usually we get caught up in the guilt of it, we feel ashamed, we get all knotted up in misery. We don't make any proper decisions, you know, so we just keep doing it. So this is why the fourth step especially is so important. So if it is an old habit, and you haven't got a vow not to lie, you just give yourself 24 hours. And we all know ourselves, if you really make that decision, 24 hours I won't lie, then you will not lie. It'll be like they're like a hawk on your little shoulder watching you, and you'll remember your commitment to yourself. That's how it works, psychologically.
What about if you can't even acknowledge that you're lying?
Then there's the problem, isn't it? We can't do anything. You can't do anything until you've acknowledged you took poison. You can't do anything to an antidote, because if you just say, no, I didn't take poison, no, I didn't, then what can you do? You can't be force-fed with medicine. You can try, but this is why the first step's so powerful. You have to acknowledge. This is already kicking and screaming to that one.
But for that, don't you need awareness?
That's what awareness, of course it is, yeah, exactly. That's right, exactly. That's right. So that's what's the interesting point. Awareness and mindfulness, this meditation technique, technically you don't learn it till high school. But in a sense you are using it in junior school, but the emphasis is different. This is a really important point. Thank you. We need awareness to recognise the actions of our body and speech. So the use of awareness, which is your mind, is mainly to control your body and speech. Once you've harnessed that, now you use your awareness of the mind itself, which is the delusions that inform the behaviour. So we're using our mind all the time, but the first level is using your mind to be aware of your body and speech, to at least harness that first. Do you guys see my point? Then your mind.
Then you have self-awareness.
Yeah, of course, that's what I'm talking about, though. That's what I'm talking about. So that's not the point I'm making, but that is what I'm talking about. So what I'm saying again, okay. Until we acknowledge in our mind anything, nothing happens. We're just mindless. Most people, as Lama Zopa said, Most people on this earth, which should break our hearts, don't even know that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their life, which means it's all out there. You know you're angry, but you did it to me, it's not mine. So until we can have this incredible first step of acknowledging that my mind plays a role, already that's so stupendous, And then, of course, you recognise that because of your crazy mind, you do bad things with your bloody body and speech, So So the first level of practice, what I'm saying is this: there's got to be awareness. You've got to be recognising that you're deluded and that you've got bad behaviour. You've got to recognise that. That's already difficult. But the first level of practice is you use your awareness to control body and speech. Then you get to high school. Now you can use your awareness to control your mind. It's more deep. It's more subtle. You see what I'm saying here? So the awareness is your mind, but you first use it to control your body and speech. Then you can use it to actually get to the delusions which inform your body and speech. Do you see what I'm saying? Behaviour, hang on a sec. Behaviour is huge. It sounds so simple. It's like what your grandma says, behave nicely. But if the world behaved nicely, oh my God, no one would suffer. And then we can see our minds. What would be the most marvellous place to live in the universe, Yeah, what's your point?
It's back to compassion.
Yes.
I'll try to phrase
Yes.
the question.
Yes.
What if I say that I have a lot of compassion, but kind of an automatic way, and this is making me suffer?
Would you give me an example, please? I hear. Give us an example.
Okay. Let's say that I suffer because someone that is hurting me.
Someone is hurting you.
Somebody is hurting me, and I feel compassion for them, and
Yes.
this is making me suffer.
Which pieces? Okay, this is very good. So tell me more detail what you mean by making you suffer. What do you mean by the suffer? Give a simple example. A simple example.
A dad that is mean. A dad. Let's say my dad.
Yeah.
Okay. He's mean to me.
Yes.
To my family.
Yes.
And I have compassion for him.
Yes.
I suffer for him.
You suffer for him.
Yes.
So you're equating suffering for him with compassion.
I
Are
have
you?
compassion, and this compassion is really hurting me.
But why is your... Okay, I would suggest the way we're talking here, Buddhist use of the word compassion, it cannot possibly hurt you. So then you've got to look at I've got to understand more clearly what you're meaning, because that's not the way the word compassion is used here.
My end of the question would be if I can be attached to compassion.
Okay, the way you're using the word compassion here, how it harms you, maybe that sounds to me, and I'm not suggesting you necessarily, but if I look in the world, if I look at a relationship between, not you now, okay? If I look at a relationship between a person who's a victim mentality and is a bit fearful of their bully husband, but they're locked into that relationship and they keep getting abused by that husband, right? And it hurts them and injures them, but they're too scared to look at themselves, and they keep trying to stroke the husband and be nice to him, mostly because it's attachment. If I be nice to him, he might love me. So it's really coming from attachment, which pollutes the compassion, which makes her afraid and fearful. And that's certainly when it comes to our powerful daddies and mummies. We want to please our daddies and mummies very badly. And our daddies, are mean and ugly to us. And a little boy in you, maybe you're talking about you, I don't know, wants him to love you. So you keep being nice to him, hoping he'll be nice back. And then it keeps hurting you because he's mean to you. So maybe we've got to give up the attachment to having him love us. The attachment to him stroking you and approving of you. That is what destroys many children until they're 90. If I do this, maybe daddy will love me. If I do that, maybe he'll be kind. That's attachment, and it's very hard to see. So when you get rid of that, he will not harm you, and he will become like a mouse. Because bullies love victims.
And they are victims because they're bullies because they are victims.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And I know that. I remember that. That's very clear to me. Bullies love victims, and we buy into these two. The typical victim-related wife or the victim son and the bully father. As long as you're a victim, it's like a scared dog. The bully dog can always have power over you. But the moment you become free of that and become strong, not beat him back, but become less needy for his approval, he can't touch you, and he will soften like a baby and be pathetic. Can you hear this?
I can hear this, but if we talk about whatever being that is dead aside of the road, and I feel sorry for that, and this is kind of hurting inside. Okay,
so again I repeat. Okay, now let's look at this. And your analysis, like I said before, you're equating hurting you with compassion. harming you. The Buddhist view of compassion can't possibly harm you. You're seeing someone else's suffering, which means in the Buddhist view you also know why they're suffering because of their karma and their crazy delusions, and you have empathy with them, but you're strong enough because you understand it and you can see how they're harming themselves, but that compassion can't possibly harm you. And if it is harming you, it's because it's mixed with attachment and kind of sentimental and fear. Do you see what I'm saying? The one about the bully victim is kind of powerful, you know. It's very scary because the world is, you know, relationships. People are victimized by other people. Children of their parents, you know, often it can be both ways, but the typical one is the lady and the man. And the man's the bully, beats and rapes and kills, but lots of, everybody, we can see it in relationships. You can see it in animals, you know. And so when we're a victim, it's very scary because you're really convinced you have no power and you're really convinced that person is a monster. And we keep wanting them to change. It'll never happen until you change. And this is why we've got to take responsibility. Because when there's no victim, when we're feeling powerful, people can't harm us. It's not meant to be cosmic, it's true, you know. So it's our responsibility. Yeah, your father's got a problem, but it's our responsibility to get free of your father. And we can see this, you know. When you change yourself and you're less needy for their approval, and we don't notice that. That's the deepest attachment we have. The deepest craving we have is to be seen as a good person by others. And if people keep abusing us, that's why it's so terrifying. It's hard to hear this one. So we start to approve of ourselves, which is what happens when we give up attachment, and become our own person, and become accountable. Then we become strong. Then bullies are like babies. They turn into little cowering dogs, you know. Hard to hear this when you're the victim. Because victims give all this power to the bully. And you see it out there, poor me. When you become strong, suddenly the bully collapses, you know. They can't touch you.
Can you explain or elaborate a little bit on the concept of basic goodness?
Yeah, all these terms they use to refer to this Buddha nature, basically. Basically, Buddha's view that goodness, virtue, wisdom, clarity, kindness, generosity, all these words, they are... This is another way of... Huh?
It's our default mode.
It is who we really are. In other words, okay, the analogy of water is a really nice one for me. When we say water, we know it means 2 bits of H and 1 bit of O. Okay, I know there are other minerals there, aren't there? But what we mean by water is it is in its nature pure, clear stuff, isn't it? Would you agree?
Yeah.
So it can be polluted, can't it? So that pollution, even though it will destroy you if you drank it, as long as there is water there, it does never lose its purity. You can't destroy the purity of the water because you can remove the pollution. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that? So that's the innate purity of the water. It's there, it's polluted right now, but you can extract the pollution. If the pollution literally joined the water and you could no longer separate them, then it's true that negative, and our mind is this way. That's exactly Buddha's point about Buddhahood. That virtue and goodness are like the H2O of our mind. That's who we actually are, has always been, and will always be. Natural. It doesn't seem evident to us in the beginning. There's lots of logic to prove it. And that the delusions are pollution, and you can remove the pollution. So that basic goodness, that basic purity, that Buddha nature, are indestructible. It's there, and that's what should give us so much courage.
I think that what struck me is that Buddha didn't say the steps to happiness.
But he did.
It steps the end of suffering.
Well, you flip it over, that's happiness.
Yeah,
it's just a way of framing
because
it.
Actually we have happiness, and what we are putting on our happiness is all these delusions that leads to suffering. So if you stop the suffering,
that's right, you get happiness.
You get your natural default state.
That's right, precisely.
Happiness.
That's the point. Exactly, Basile. That's exactly the point.
He didn't come up and say, let me show you how to be happy. He said how to stop suffering.
Well, he does. It's there. The Four Noble Truths are framed in the context of suffering, but the implication is nirvana is the cessation of suffering, which is the achievement of liberation. That's what they mean by it.
Automatically.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So as water can be depolluted, in other words. But there are all the teachings about pure nature. These teachings on Mahamudra, on Dzogchen, all these teachings are Buddha nature. They're all about how this stuff is innate within us. You know?
How
And
to clean the water.
Huh?
How to clean the water.
This is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're doing it. We talk the whole time. You mean
This is the process. I mean,
This is
how
what
to
I'm-
clean. This is what it is. How to clean the water.
Yes,
Right?
yes, precisely. That's exactly right. You've got to first recognise that there is pollution. You've got to recognise what it is, first noble truth. You've got to recognise the causes, second noble truth. And then you recognise you can be free of it, third noble truth. And then the methods are the fourth. So if you want to stop this is what I began with.
And then you have how to maintain it clean also.
Well, once you've removed the causes,
Yeah.
once you've realised emptiness,
Then you have
permanent
the
maintenance. No, once you've realised emptiness, there's no longer maintenance because now all the pollution's gone for eternity. Once you've realised emptiness and perfected that realisation, you're no longer maintenance. It's now finished. The job's done. You don't have to maintain anymore. You only are good now. Your basic purity has been manifest. The pollution has gone. Can never return. Because why? I'll tell you why. I'll show you why. As long as we have the Buddhist view, take the Buddhist view that everything in the mind comes down, and certainly the gross level, to being conceptual. So like we keep talking about what's true and what's not true. So if I say, like I say, I'm holding 2 cups in my right hand. Simply and immediately, based upon conventional truth, we can all immediately say, no, Robina, you've got 1 cup in your hand. Simple, isn't it? So remember, what Buddha's saying is all these delusions, the particular characteristic they have is their lies. Attachment sees deliciousness in the cake that isn't in the cake. I've projected it. Aversion sees ugliness in Paros that is not in Paros. I've projected it. And ignorance projects inherent delicious chocolate cake, inherent ugly Paros, inherent Robina, independent of everything else, frozen in space, stuck in stone. So these are all literally misconceptions, but they're so internalized in us, so spontaneous, we don't notice even that we think them, forget about feel them. But they're basically conceptual non-truths, they're misconceptions. So in the same way, we did this already, in the same way that you can say to me, no, Robina, don't be silly. That's a wrong thought. It's a misconception. There's only 1 cup in your hand. And because I'm not stuck on that lie, I'll go, oh, you're absolutely right. There is 1 cup in my right hand. Maybe we didn't do this one. So, okay, first of all, would you agree there are 2 cups in my right hand is a thought, yeah? And do you agree there is 1 cup in my hand is also a thought? So you would agree conventionally that one is a truth and one is a misconception. You agree with that, don't you? That's exactly how Buddha talks when he looks at the model of the mind. The delusions, the liars, the misconceptions, the dramas, the afflictions, the neuroses have this aspect of being liars. But they're ancient history in our mind. They're so instinctive that we don't even think we think them anymore. It just appears true to us. In other words, you believe for so long that you're holding 2 cups in your hand, you actually see 2 cups in your hand. Buddha says for eons we've been believing things are inherent. For eons we've been believing an attachment story, an anger story, and jealousy story, and permanent story. They're stories finally in our mind that we have now believed as the truth. And things even appear to us in this way. Bad enough, as Lama Zopa says, that the world appears to us in a way that isn't accurate due to our lies for so long. But now we believe it's true, and this is the killer. So, once we understand the delusions which bring enormous suffering and terrible pain are based in being misconceptions, lies. Then here, you pointed out to me, because I'm not stuck on this lie, I just made a mistake. It's not a deep lie in my mind. I didn't even mean to say it. And you say to me, Robina, come on, darling, there's only 1 cup in your hand. And I'll go, oops-a-daisy, you're absolutely right. There's 1 cup in my hand. So what happened to the thought? There are 2 cups in my hand. What happened to it?
Vanished.
Vanished. Perfect answer.
Collapsed.
More than collapsed, vanished. It vanished.
Does
And-
it vanish, or does it become a seed that's coming down?
No, it vanished. Listen to it. Listen to my point. It vanished. And what makes it vanish? Thank you. So if I say, oh, are you sure? Nah, that's really 2 there. I'll have a doubt. I'll never be really clear. But when I'm crystal clear, and I don't believe what you're saying, but I know it's true, when I have the truth in my mind, when I'm convinced of the truth, then the lie disappears into a puff of smoke. And when you finally see the truth, there's no inherent I or in everything else, things are interdependent. When you see that truth and then perfect that truth, then that's the end of samsara. That's literally the end. That's the pollution gone. Finally gone. Because everything in the mind, everything is in the mind, and all those lies are the cause of it. But they're eons old, so don't hold your breath. It takes a while to see the truth. But it's literally like this. Literally. And that's why the Buddha would say our mind is basically pure, our basic goodness, Buddha nature, all these terms. Not just some holy idea. It's literally the way Buddha says. Mind, and that virtue, therefore, he said this is where it's curious too. Virtue sounds like we understand virtue and goodness, but then to relate it to truth sounds peculiar. But you listen to this. First of all, Buddha's view of reality. The conventional way of talking about reality is that everything exists interdependently. There's nothing that doesn't exist in dependence upon something else. It's like a highly complex scenario of interdependence. Everything working harmoniously and beautifully and interdependently, you know? It's sort of a very loosey-goosey way of talking. Conventional reality. But then ultimately... No, forget that, sorry. So then, okay, so that's the point. Interdependence, reality, conventional truth, which implies the ultimate, which is emptiness. But the conventional way of talking. So, okay, there's Vasilis and me having a chat. We're friendly, just friends, you know? And I'm chatting to him, I mentioned this before. I'm chatting away, he's chatting away, I laugh at his jokes, he laughs at my jokes, I empathise with his headache, he empathises with my knee ache, you know. So you wouldn't say this, but this is technically what's happening. Oh, Robina and Vasilis are having love and compassion for each other. Technically that's true. I'm empathising and I'm having delight, I'm happy he's happy. That's love and compassion, basically. That's running the show right now. Now look at what it's like. Look at us. There's a sense of interdependence, isn't there? There's a sense of we're very harmonious and friendly. There's no real vivid sense of I and him. You get my point here? It's very harmonious. That's a simple, sweet way of expressing that we're working interdependently. Interdependence is natural. Well, that's a function of virtue. Love necessarily is connected with me, connected to him. Empathy and compassion are connected to him. But now look what happens when we start to fight. Suddenly the we is cut in half. Suddenly the poor little sleeping lion of self-pity me rises, and his sleeping lion of self-pity me rises, and now I look at daggers at him, he looked daggers at me, you said this, no, you said that, I'm this, not fair, blah, blah, blah. That's delusions are now there, and they've got nothing to do with interdependence. There's a vivid sense of set in stone me, a vivid sense of me and ugly him over there, having nothing to do with me, separate, bereft, lonely, paranoid. Can you hear me? That's got zero to do with interdependence. We're not in touch with interdependence anymore. We're now in touch with self-pity set in stone me. Can you hear me? So virtues are actually close to truth. Until you realise emptiness, there's still a sense of self-existent me having compassion for self-existent him, but it's getting closer to truth than the delusions. Can you hear me at all? So virtue is at the core of our being. It's indestructible. When you're an enlightened being, you only have virtue left, and goodness and bliss and clarity and independence as vast as the universe. That is what we really are. It's not as if we've been it before and we've lost it. Not like that. Not the Christian teachings. I remember talking to my Jesuit priest friend, and he said they have a big discussion about that, how God made you perfect, but then you become imperfect again. Logically, Buddhism says that's impossible. Because if the seed of, when you've realised emptiness, you've seen the truth finally, you no longer believe in the lies, you've cut the root is gone, the delusions have vanished. If the belief in the I and everything else have vanished, the seed has been burned, it can never grow again. So in this sense you can say that when we've achieved this goodness and achieved our own nirvana, it's permanent, it can never change, it can never go back to suffering. Because the seed is gone. So that's why this priest said they had a big problem with how God can make you an extension of him who is perfect, and then you can become imperfect. That would be impossible in Buddhist view. We're having a very interesting discussion about it. Are we communicating?
Yes.
I mean, these are interesting points, aren't we? It's 1 o'clock, time for lunch. So let's think of lunch as blissful, radiant nectar, the nature of bliss, which we'll talk about later when it comes to Tantra. Radiant nectar, the nature of bliss, oceans of it. And we bless it with the energy of all the Buddhas in the universe. Om Mahung, Om Mahung, Om Mahung. And now we think of this oceans of delicious nectar. And the most important thing, as Lama Zopa says, we should offer it. So we think. All the Gurus, all the Buddhas, all the Bodhisattvas, all the holy beings, and all the suffering, sentient beings. Eons of them, oceans of them, pervading space. And then finally we see them all And the Lama Zopa says this is the very meaning, the essence of the word to offer, to give, is to imagine the recipients experiencing the bliss of receiving this amazing nectar that we happily offer. Lama Sangye Lama Che Dejen Lama Gedun Te Kungi Jepo Lama Che Lama Namla Che Pa Bu. And also we think I'm going to eat this delicious nectar so I can be healthy and happy, so I can continue to be of benefit to sentient beings, never giving up. And those few thoughts are so stupendous that you just sowed into your mind that it's sort of like icing on the top. It'll kind of put an atomic bomb under the attachment. So, eat food with delight and joy. Okay. So I think we come back at 3. Is that okay? We've got a few things to do yet. No time to waste. Come back at 3? Enough time? Do what you want. Maybe a nap, talk, whatever you like. I'll see you at 3. We're going to have photo shoots
Yes,
now.
about the photo, yes.